On the 21st of October 1949, Stanley Tiffin, a farm labourer, was shooting ducks on the mud flats of Essex and came across a horrific find. To his shock, he had come across the torso of a man with no head or legs. He marked the spot and hurried off to call the police. As James will tell, this is Vintage Murders and the curious case of the flying smuggler.
When the authorities arrived at the scene of this untoward discovery, they discovered that the remains had 5 stab marks to the chest, but no wounds on the arms or hands. But they noticed one curious thing about the corpse. The bones had been broken and impacted, and it appeared as if the torso had fallen from a great height to the ground, possibly from a plane. As the investigation started of this grim discovery, the fingerprints of the victim were taken and checked against police records, and it was discovered that they matched those of a Stanley Setti. He had been convicted of fraud 20 years earlier. He had kept out of trouble with the law since then, and was a prominent figure of the second-hand car market that had grown up around the Warren Street area of London. Setti's birth name was Sulman Setti, and he was born in 1908 in Baghdad of Jewish parents, and later changed his name to Stanley Setti after moving to England. He was found guilty of fraud back in the 1920s and spent some time in prison. He was well regarded in the second-hand car market, as he was generous with loans to others down on their luck. He was last seen on the 4th of October 1949, carrying £5,000 in cash. No one had seen or heard from him since. The police knew that the discovery of his torso was going to be a tough case to crack. A day after his disappearance, the family went to the police, who were puzzled that his car was outside his lockup in Cambridge Terrace Mews, yet he was missing. The police got hold of his notebook and began to interview and eliminate potential suspects. So far, they had identified the victim, possible date of his death, and known associates. One close associate stood out, which brings us to a character by the name of Donald Hume. He was the illegitimate son of a schoolmistress born in 1919 in Swanage, and had been abandoned to be brought up in a bleak and foreboding West Country orphanage, which had left him emotionally traumatised for life. It left him with a chip on his shoulder. Conditions were so awful that any infringements by the children would result in them being sent to a darkened cellar. The staff even arranged for one of their number to put on a green cloak and pretend to be the ghost of an old green gypsy to scare them. Hume, in a later memoir, said he recognised the shoes of one of the staff in the disguise and apparently chased her away with an axe. He was rescued by his grandmother and an Aunt Doody, who was headmistress at a small Hampshire village school, and agreed to take charge of him. In her care, he seemed to have lived an existence that was very much in the background to the rest of the family, as, for instance, his aunt would take her 2 daughters, Peggy and Betty, away on holiday, whilst leaving him behind on their farm. But Hume was beginning to show some dangerous tendencies, as he shot a prize cockerel during their absence. His distrust of human nature and society was growing. This was not helped when he was told by a housemaid that his aunt was in fact his real mother. When he was older, at the age of 15, he left the farm behind as he wanted to join a cruise liner, but ended up in Hammersmith in London after befriending a lorry driver who helped him get accommodation and a manual job. He basically drifted aimlessly around, and he even joined the Communist Party and wanted to join the International Brigade, but was deemed too young. It is debatable whether he was committed to communism or relished a fight with the other side. He made a visit to Somerset House to see his birth certificate, which confirmed that his aunt was really in fact his mother. As a result, he wrote a letter to her saying he wanted nothing more to do with her. In the coming years, he became a petty criminal, including theft, fraud, and eventually making bootleg gin, which he sold to nightclubs, as there was a shortage of alcohol supply at that time. It was marketed under the name of Finlinson's Old English Gin, which composed surgical spirit with a small amount of real gin. At the outbreak of the Second World War, he joined the army, but was invalided out due to contracting meningitis. He bought a RAF uniform and started to impersonate a flying officer, acquired a false medal, calling himself Pilot Officer Dan Hume, DFM, and demanded lodgings at various military bases. But he was finally caught after signing dud checks and given a suspended sentence by the court. Like a lot of young men who drift, marriage and a child started to sort him out. He met Cynthia Wright, and he started a small legitimate electrical business in Finchley Road. But Hume was also keeping bad company, in the form of the flamboyant 46-year-old Stanley Setti. He first met Setti in 1947, when he sold a car to him. They met again at a Soho nightclub in 1949 and formed a criminal partnership. Setti was fiddling the logbooks of crash-written-off cars and selling stolen cars with these false logbooks. Also, Setti was selling forged fuel coupons made by Hume. He needed someone to do the running around, and David Hume fitted the part. By this time, Hume had acquired a private pilot's license, and he was known in certain circles as the Flying Smuggler, as he would make clandestine flights to France. He was also active in black market activities. Like many criminal partnerships, both men did not like each other that much, and only worked together through mutual necessity. Setti, being a convicted fraudster himself, and at the time bankrupt, could not open a bank account. He had recently sold a Wolseley 12 saloon to a dealer, who paid £1,000 with a cheque, which Hume cleared that day with his bank. He received £200 in £5 notes. The consecutive serial numbers were recorded by the bank, which was standard practice. But evidence was beginning to mount up against Hume. He deposited £100 of the said notes in his own bank, and a taxi driver remembered him giving a £5 note with one of the tainted serial numbers. Hume had picked up the taxi at Southend Airport and was driven to Finchley Road in Golders Green. When his flat was searched, the police came across a left luggage ticket issued at Golders Green Station. It related to a blood-stained suitcase, it was discovered. Witnesses remembered seeing Hume bringing 2 parcels with him to a light aircraft that he had hired for the day. At his flat, Hume's behaviour was becoming more sinister. The carpet was sent to the dry cleaners, and the floor had been re-stained. When the police raided the flat, they came across bloodstains under the floorboards. But when the police searched the flat, they could not find any of Setti's fingerprints. But the alternative evidence was damning. He was arrested and put on trial for murder on the 18th of January 1950. At first, Hume tried to bluff his way out with the police, stating that he had hired the aeroplane to dispose of printing presses used in forging petrol coupons. This did not work, and he changed his story. He now claimed that 3 smugglers that he knew from his periodic visits to France had met him around the time of the murder and persuaded him at gunpoint to carry some parcels and dispose of them in the Channel. The bloodstains discovered came from the parcels, which he had kept in his flat. A defence witness was found, confirmed that Hume had operated in Paris and that the smuggling gang did exist. So, was Hume an unwilling accomplice? The jury was reminded that if there was any doubt about the facts before them, that they would have to return a verdict of not guilty. Even if he was able to avoid being blamed for murder, he was on the line for being an accessory to the crime. On the 20th of January, the jury was not able to come to a conclusion as to his guilt. After he was found not guilty, a second jury was sworn in, and Hume pleaded guilty to being an accessory to murder and was sentenced to 12 years in Dartmoor prison. He was released after 8 years on the 11th of February 1958, but authorities never guessed as to Hume's deteriorating personality. As he was short of money, he trawled Fleet Street trying to sell his story. The law at the time had a double jeopardy rule that meant you could not be tried twice if you were found not guilty of a particular offence. On the 16th of June 1958, readers of the Sunday Pictorial got a scoop in which Hume admitted to the murder of Stanley Settee. In this version, Settee let himself into the flat while Hume's wife was upstairs listening to the radio. A terrific row ensued between the two men, and Hume produced a dagger and killed the victim. There were 2 possible explanations for this argument. The first is that Hume's beloved dog was kicked by Settee for some unknown reason, and the second was that Settee was having an affair with Hume's wife. Hume had dragged the 13-stone Settee into the coal cupboard before the gruesome process of chopping up the body. As he lived on the 2nd floor in a flat above a greengrocer's shop, he had to dispose of the body away from the crime scene. He hit on what he thought was the perfect crime, as he would fly out to sea over the channel and throw his victim into the water below. He was able to avoid being detected by his wife, and he cut off the head and legs of the victim before going to Elstree Airfield to dispose of the remains out at sea, which was successful. The second part proved more of a problem. He wrapped the torso in a carpet with some weights and asked a decorator to help him carry it to the car. This time Hume, however, had a problem disposing of the body from the aircraft, as he had to open the door to dispose of it, as well as flying the plane. The weather was awful, and Hume mistook the sea off the Essex marshes for the Channel. He managed to get the door of the plane open in preparation for jettisoning the remains of the corpse. But it did not quite go according to plan, as the body slipped out of the roll of carpet before making its way to the ground. The carpet and the weights in it to make sure that everything sank without trace were left in the plane. These were quickly thrown out, but the torso could be seen floating in the sea and eventually drifted onto the mudflats. In theory, Hume could have been tried for perjury, but his defence would have been that the story was a lie concocted to receive a fee of an estimated £3,600 from the newspaper. The rest of Fleet Street, annoyed at this scoop, reverted to outrage over this story. The Star pompously announced that it is bad for a nation when a man can get away with murder and show a profit. Hume was becoming paranoid about people recognizing him and acquired a bogus passport in the name of John Bird. He settled in Zurich in Switzerland and saw this as a temporary step ahead of his real dream of going to Canada. Like many men who go on lengthy prison sentences, his wife had divorced him. In Zurich, he met the owner of a beauty salon called Trudy Sommer. Zurich is an expensive place, and courting a local woman only added to his own costs. He had run through most of the newspaper's money and was down to his last £150. He needed cash quickly. Instead of learning a useful trade in prison, he decided to rob banks instead. He returned to England under the name of Donald Brown. On the 1st of August 1958, he raided the Midland Bank on Boston Manor Road in London by going up to the cashier, Frank Lewis, shooting him in the stomach and making off with £2,000. The cashier luckily survived the ordeal. Hume made his escape to Kew Bridge Station and within 24 hours was back in Zurich. A number of weeks later, he was back in London, and instead of trying his luck robbing other banks, he went back to the same branch that he had previously raided. This time, the management were wise to his methods. The staff disappeared under the counter as he pulled a gun and demanded cash, and set the alarm off in the process before running to the exit for safety. Hume was only able to rifle a small amount of cash from the tills, wounding the manager, Eric Ayres, in the process before making his escape. But his life was beginning to unravel. The police realised that Donald Brown and Donald Hume were indeed the same person. Also, Trudy, his girlfriend, had seen the bogus passport and realised the picture bore no resemblance to her lover. Her suspicions were further aroused when she trod on some bullets. In December 1959 he went to Canada, but returned to Zurich in the new year, where he now started to target the local banks. His first, and as it turned out, his last bank raid, was the Gerber Bank on the 30th of January 1959. It all went horribly wrong from when he entered the building at 11:30 a.m. with a cardboard box containing a gun, which he then pulled out and aimed at the cashier, Walter Schenkel, and fired before jumping over the counter to get to the tills containing the money. Schenkel, despite being badly wounded, raised the alarm, and a small crowd pursued Hume through a series of alleyways down to the embankment of the river. 50-year-old taxi driver Arthur Marg tried to stop him, but Hume shot him in his desperation to get away, mortally wounding him. Eventually, he was overpowered and marched to the local police station. As Switzerland does not have the death penalty, he was sentenced at the Zurich District Court to life imprisonment with hard labour at Regensdorf prison. He was released in 1976 due to his clearly unbalanced mind. Deported, and on arrival at Heathrow Airport, he was checked over by 2 psychiatrists, found certifiably insane, and promptly committed to Broadmoor Secure Hospital. So, John, what eventually happened to him?
Apparently, he responded well to treatment and was released in 1983, moving to North Kensington in London, where he lived quietly for the rest of his life. He died on the 30th of July 1988.